Hi, I'm Carrie Jagger, the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension Educator with OSU Extension in Morrow County, Ohio. Today I'm going to talk about Seed Starting 101. With seed starting, you can keep it simple or you can make it a little more difficult. It just depends on your skill level and how much time you want to spend on it. Here's some pictures that I have of some of the seeds that I've started. I use seed trays, a seed starting mix, and then I use popsicle sticks for my labels. I wrap it in plastic wrap, and that kind of creates a little greenhouse. We'll get into that more as we go along through this presentation. You might want to think about seed starting versus purchasing transplants. Start your own or purchase transplants. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. Factors to consider include timing, soil mix, lighting, temperature, fertilization, and watering. Plants need to be hardened off before transplanting into the garden. So keep that in mind if you're going to plant seeds for transplants. You would need to have a cold frame to do this. And then transplanting, consider timing, the type of vegetables you want to grow, and the weather conditions that you have in your area. You want to choose the right seeds. There's a lot of different brands out there. There's a lot of different varieties. Do you want to plant organic, non-organic, hybrid, open pollinated, heirloom, or standard varieties? How are hybrid and open pollinated vegetables different? Well, what is a hybrid anyways? It's the pollination of one genetically uniform variety with pollen from another specific genetically uniform variety. Seed companies choose parent varieties that will produce first-generation offspring, F1 hybrids, with special characteristics they desire. This is done in a very controlled manner so that all plants grown from the hybrid seed will be the result of the desired cross and they're genetically identical. A lot of folks that plant tomatoes or cucumbers and peppers for commercial production choose F1 hybrids because, like this says, they're genetically identical and a lot of them are bred to withstand stresses such as maybe too much heat or too much water. Some of them are bred to be more disease tolerant or even disease resistant. Hybrids are more uniform, which make the crops more predictable. That's why commercial producers like them. Some produce earlier, some produce higher yields, some have higher germination rates, and some can be more cold tolerant. An F1 hybrid or a hybrid, they don't breed true. So they're not really a reliable seed source. What does not breeding true mean? They do not produce seeds that will be grown into plants exactly like themselves, because in the next generation, the genes have segregated into many new combinations. Like I said, saving hybrid seed really is not a reliable seed source. Standard open pollinated or heirloom seeds or plants, they self-pollinate or are pollinated by the wind or insects. They're more or less stabilized in their characteristics. They remain fairly consistent. They produce reliable seed that can be reused to get the same plant. And they could be different than their parents due to cross-pollination. So if you want to save your favorite heirloom tomato from year to year, you'll want to plant it away from other tomatoes so that it doesn't cross-pollinate. Or if it does cross-pollinate, then you could create your own tomato. What do seeds need to germinate? Living, healthy embryonic tissue. What is the germination percentage of your seed? Most seed packets will say on it the germination percentage of it. Is it 50%? Is it 85%? Is it 90%? This is something that you need to know, because if your cucumber seeds are only, the germination rate is only 50%, then you're going to want to plant more of those seeds if only 50% of what you plant germinates. You want correct soil moisture and soil temperature conditions. You don't want that soil to be super, super wet, but you also don't want the soil to be super, super dry. It needs to be even moisture, and the temperature of that soil needs to be really warm for those seeds to germinate. Each seed type requires different needs. Some require a cold treatment before you plant them, some don't. Some require you soak them before you plant them, some don't. Some need maybe air movement to them. Some seeds need light. So you don't want to plant them too deep because they need that light to germinate. And some need a dormant period. So for instance, they may fall off the plant and lay in the garden all winter and then that gives them a cold treatment, and then in the following spring they'll germinate. If you've grown tomatoes, a lot of you maybe have seen volunteer tomatoes. I see volunteer tomatoes in my garden every year. That's an example of a seed falling off, going through the winter, and then germinating. Steps of seed germination. Imbibition. The seed rapidly takes up water, and the seed coat swells and softens. Interim or lag phase. The seed activates its internal physiology, cells respire, the seed starts to make proteins and metabolize its stored food. The seed is the food source for that plant until it can get a root to start pulling food out of the soil. The radicle and root emergence. Cells start to elongate and divide, bringing the root and the radicle out of that seed coat. So there's dicots. They're a two-seeded leaf. So like a bean is a dicot. You've got this seed that you planted, it's pushed its primary root. You've got your cotyledons and your first true leaves. And then you've got your monocots, your one-seeded leaves. So you plant your seed, that radicle starts to go down, make those roots, and then you start to get your foliage and your leaves on those monocots. Seedling development. You need optimal temperature for growing, may be different on different seedlings. And then optimal temperature will stimulate optimal growth. Cooler temperatures will generally slow growth. Warmer temperatures will generally speed up growth. When should you start your seedlings? Well, it kind of depends on what you want to grow. Are you growing cool season, warm season? Are you growing it for spring? Are you growing it for fall? And then it depends on your climate outside, your climate inside, the types of seeds that you want to sow. Here's a chart that you can use for seed starting. So if you're going to start seeds indoors, I like to start tomatoes more in like the February time frame, and then peppers in that February time frame. Onions, same. Those three take a little bit longer. Peppers and onions really take a long time to germinate, so don't let them get you discouraged. And then some of these cold crops, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, I like to plant those in March. And that gives a plenty of time for those plants to get nice and big before they need to be transplanted outside. Now, if you start them in February and March, you start them in a smaller container, like a little cell, like I showed in the very first slide, and then you can bump those up into bigger containers as they grow. Some common vegetables, your general planting dates, cool season, March through mid-May. These are kind of considered your cool season crops. And then you've got warm season, mid-May through June. These are considered your warm season crops. Your tomatoes, your peppers, your beans, your sweet corn. Know your frost-free date. In Morrow County, according to the Old Farmer's Almanac, the frost-free date is May 10th. So I don't necessarily agree with that because in the last several years we've had frost dates after May 10th. So once the frost-free date is determined, look at your seeds and count backwards to determine when to start them indoors. For example, if your tomato seeds should be started 8 weeks before being transferred outdoors, you would want to sow them March 13th. You can also direct seed outside when the threat of frost is gone. But some of your plants, like tomatoes and peppers, don't do well if you direct seed them outside. They may not have fruit on them in time for you to eat it before it frosts out. Some seeds can be planted as soon as the soil can be worked in the spring. I like to use the Old Farmer's Almanac. There's a few other almanacs that you can use. I have a Garden Moon app that I use on my phone. Those aren't research based. They're kind of, I guess, maybe considered old wives' tales, but I go by them. It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It's kind of a fun thing to do. This John Sheeper's Kitchen Garden Seeds. I've bought seeds from here. I bought a lot of bulbs from here. But what's cool about this is if you sign up for this, they'll send you recipes throughout the summer of the garden produce that you have coming on. And some of them are really, really good. Here's soil temperature conditions for vegetable crops to germinate. Most of them of your cold crops are in that 40-degree range, and then you get up into the 60-degree range for your warm season crops. Lettuce can be 35. And then it shows the optimum range and then your maximum range versus minimum range. You need a starting mix. I'm not promoting any of these, but you want a good seed starting mix to start your seeds in indoors. It's a good soilless mix. You don't ever want to use soil from the garden or topsoil. It's just too heavy for them. You want to make sure it's new, that it's sterile. It's very finely textured, like I said, and soilless. This will ensure good root development and reduce damping off. When you're going to plant your seeds, you want to pre-moisten the mix. You select a seed starting containers with good drainage. Plastic containers are better than terracotta for moisture retention. Used containers should be cleaned and sterilized. 1 part bleach, 10 parts water. Soak for a minimum of 10 minutes. Use a mist bottle to water your plants, that way you don't drown them out. And label each seed so that it's not a surprise when you go to plant them. Do they need light or dark to germinate? Should they even be started indoors? Some require that and some don't. Caring for your planted seeds, keep them moist until they germinate. Cover with plastic until they germinate, like I showed in the very first picture. Provide warmth, 65 to 70 degrees. Provide light. Water with half-strength fertilizer and watch for damping off. Damping off is when the plant starts to wilt and die. You want to make sure that you maintain sufficient moisture, not too wet, but not too dry. You want to water deep. Make sure you're watering clear and the water's getting clear through that cell and it's leaching out the bottom. You don't want to overwater. You want it to almost dry out between waterings, but not completely dry, to the point where the plant is wilting. And then maintain good air circulation around those plants. That helps them to stay sturdy and it helps to keep bacteria and fungus from settling. Here's some pictures of some transplants. You can use little cells like I was talking about, and then once they start to get their first and second set of leaves, you can bump those up, or you can start them right in these little containers as well. As soon as your seedlings have developed at least one set of true leaves and are large enough to handle, you can transplant them into larger containers or larger packs. This just gives them room to continue to grow and develop. After hardening plants off and the soil temperatures warm up, you want to wait and make sure it's a cloudy afternoon or late in the day. And then you can use a trench method for tomato plants when you're transplanting those. What is hardening off? I've mentioned it several times. It's the final step before you're planting your seedlings. It should be started 2 weeks before planting in the garden. This stimulates plants to accumulate carbohydrate and nutrient reserves and strong cell walls. This step is very important, especially if they will be planted under stress early in the season. Here's some types of cold frames. I have one very similar to this that I use to harden off my plants. Just make sure if you put them out there that you open the window on a hot sunny day because it will bake them. And I know that from experience. In summary, you want to choose good seed. Make sure it's a reputable seed source. Choose good seed starting mix. Make sure it's not heavy or wet and nasty when you get it. Give your seeds and seedlings proper care. Give them room to grow, harden them off, and then plant them in the garden. Happy planting.